Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Ashley Watts, the President and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I hope everyone here in Kentucky is enjoying this beautiful weather for as long as we have it. It makes working at home and quarantine a little easier to deal with when it's so nice outside. So I hope everyone is having a good week thus far. I am excited about this conversation. Many of you, I'm sure, were on the conversation we had a couple weeks ago with Neil Bradley dealing with the federal implementation of the CARES Act and what was going on. So we are very fortunate to have him back with us today. So Neil Bradley is probably familiar to many of you all from the last couple of calls, but he's the Executive Vice President for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he heads up all policy for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they have been such a tremendous resource to us at the Kentucky Chamber and for really all of our local chambers here in Kentucky the past couple of weeks. I don't think any of us expected to deal with a world health pandemic. And so having them and their expertise and their guidance, especially on the issues that are happening at a federal level, really has been extraordinary for us kind of here in Kentucky that are a little bit removed from the world of Washington, D.C. I know they work very closely with our federal delegation, especially Leader McConnell. And some of you all were on a call with Leader McConnell that we hosted on Friday, where he kind of gave the background information of him sponsoring the CARES Act, the implementation. There's possibly going to need to be more money put into the loan program, which I'm sure Neil is going to cover. But we really are very fortunate to have the U.S. Chamber as such a great resource and connection for us. Anytime we need something or have a question, they are always right there to help. And so we greatly, greatly appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedule to hop on a call with us. And today, Neil's going to kind of cover everything going on at the federal level. I know there's probably lots of questions about the small business loans and unemployment insurance, and if there's going to be another phase in all of this. And so I'm sure he'll cover that. There are several hundred people on this webinar. And so just to make sure that things run smoothly, we do have everyone muted, and you were able to submit questions beforehand when you registered. So I do have the list of questions that were submitted. So at the end, if we have some time, I will kind of moderate a Q&A with Neil and try to get to as many questions as we can at the end. So with that, Neil, welcome. You have several hundred people here in Kentucky that are very excited to hear about what you have to say about what's going on in DC and all the federal legislation that's passed. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Ashley. It's great to be with you again. Great to be with your membership there. I'm going to pull up a quick presentation here that we can use to walk through the CARES Act. And as we do, we'll talk about some of the issues that are in play at the moment and that we're navigating through. Let me get it up on the presentation mode there. There we are. And we can also talk about how some of this is changing in real time with respect to the guidance that's coming out of federal agencies for the implementation. So one of the things I just caution everyone at the beginning with is the fact that this is changing, and as agencies are interpreting things differently, they're applying different criteria, and then sometimes within days they're reversing themselves and rechanging their interpretation. So we're going to give you the snapshot of where we see things today, some of the unresolved issues, and how we can think about this going forward into future legislative and regulatory processes. So let's just quickly remind everyone, the CARES Act overview, major provisions, $2.2 trillion bill. A big portion of this, about $454 billion, can be provided to the Federal Reserve, which can use the magic of leveraging to turn $400 billion into $4 trillion. This is still the phase 3 bill, as we now talk about phase 3.5 or 4 and 5. The CARES Act is the 3 bill. Treasury is already in the process of implementing the automatic payments to individuals. So if you're a taxpayer, you have incomes under $75,000 as an individual, under $150,000 as a couple, you will be receiving an automatic payment, $1,200 for that individual, $2,400 for a joint return, $500 per child. Some changes that have happened on this, lots of confusion. Which tax returns are we using, et cetera? If you filed your 2019 tax returns, that's what they're using. If you haven't, that's okay. They're going to use your 2018 returns. If you indicated direct deposit instructions on your last tax return, that's where they'll be depositing the money. If you didn't have direct deposit instructions the last time, you should go to the IRS website, and they're providing instructions and guidance on how to make sure that your check gets to you. The expanded unemployment is rolling out slowly kind of across the country. So remember, even though there's a lot of federal money here and kind of some new federal eligibility rules, it is still a state administered program. And across the country, every time we do one of these, we find out each state's at a little bit different place in terms of where they are on implementing this, particularly as we think about expanded eligibility. So for example, independent contractors, newly eligible, not normally eligible for unemployment, eligible under this. And so different state labor departments or whoever administers it in your state are at different phases of implementing that. Let me remind people, a constant question that comes up, we hear a lot about, for some lower wage employees, with the additional $600 on top of your regular weekly benefit, it could be close to what you were making at when they were employed, before they were furloughed. It is still the case. You cannot quit your job and then get unemployment insurance. It's also the case that if your job is offered back to you and you decline to take it back, you lose your eligibility for the expanded unemployment insurance benefit. So it's a tough decision for a lot of employers about how to think this through. But remember, when you reopen and you offer that job back, that withdraws that eligibility for unemployment insurance for individuals. Three big categories of provisions for employers: things that benefit all employers, things that benefit larger employers, and things that benefit small businesses and independent contractors. We'll quickly walk through the first two buckets. If you have not taken advantage of changing as an employer your payroll taxes, you should be doing that right now. Even at the U.S. Chamber, because we pay employer taxes, we're working with our payroll service provider to make sure that we are holding on to our portion of the payroll taxes between now and the end of the year. And so if you do that 6.2% that you would normally be paying for your employees on their paychecks, you don't have to pay that this year, and you pay 50% of it at the end of 2021 and the remainder at the end of 2022. This is perhaps the easiest provision for employers to take advantage of to improve liquidity. Remember, if you have those NOLs, AMT credits, interest deductibility expenses, qualified improvement properties for retail or restaurants, you should be talking to your tax accountant right now. All of these provisions are designed to get you quick refunds so that you can improve your liquidity. So if you're in any of those boxes, you should be talking to whoever prepares your taxes to take advantage of those. The employee retention credit. This is a relatively new provision. This applies in two circumstances. You as an employer were fully or partially shut down because of a governmental order, like the governmental orders almost the entire nation is under now, or you've had a 50% drop in gross receipts in a quarter compared to the prior year. And what you have eligible for you is that 50% tax credit on the first $10,000 in wages paid per employee. So that $5,000 that you can get maximum tax credit. There are two different rules based on the size of your operation. If you have more than 100 employees, it only applies to the extent that the employee is not providing services. That term is not defined in the legislation. And so we are talking right now with Capitol Hill and with the Treasury Department. We are urging that they take a very liberal definition of that. We all know that there are lots of people who aren't doing their normal jobs that employers are keeping on the payroll, and maybe they're doing something else at home. They're helping with a long-term project because employers want to do the right thing, but they're not generating revenue. They're not, generating income for the business or doing the work they normally perform. Our view, what we're lobbying for, is that should qualify for the tax credit. If you have less than 100 employees, you don't have to worry about this. It's whatever you're paying employees, whether they're providing services or not. And just remember, if you get one of those Paycheck Protection Program loans, you can't get the employee retention tax credit. One other issue that's come up that we just got clarity on this morning is a little bit about how to judge the size of the enterprise and a per location basis. And we believe that we're going to get guidance out of Treasury that says for the purposes of qualifying based on being fully or partially shut down, that's going to be done on a location by location basis, which will help some employers who maybe have folks at headquarters but don't have folks in the field or in different circumstances. Midsize and larger. So this is that 454 billion I mentioned. On Monday, we were supposed to get guidance from the Treasury Department for airlines and air cargo and kind of the associated industry, as well as national security, about how this program would work. As of right now, we still don't have that guidance. And so we're a little bit behind on Treasury kind of implementing this, which also means we're behind on the larger programs for the loan facilities that will come out of the Federal Reserve to support lending to mid-size and larger businesses. One of the issues that's come up that Secretary Mnuchin just this morning provided some clarity to was what your investment grade will have to be to qualify for this. There's a lot of concern that if folks who are just below investment grade quality in terms of their debt won't qualify for getting these types of loans. He indicated this morning that there's going to be some provision for those folks who are right on the bubble and just below investment grade. If you're retailers and others in that space, that's going to be really important for them, particularly for those big box store employers who are retailers. So if you work a lot with them, you'll want to pay attention to that. And then, of course, there will be restrictions on stock buybacks and executive compensation. We turn to small businesses. The Paycheck Protection Program. This is the one, this has kind of been the marquee program so far. $349 billion in loans for small businesses, generally less than 500 employees, C3, self-employed, sole proprietors, independent contractors. Small businesses with employees and sole proprietors were able to apply beginning last Friday. So far, there's been over $70 billion in loans applied for that are currently getting a loan number sent back out. The self-employed and independent contractors can begin applying for these loans this Friday. We are awaiting guidance from the SBA and Treasury about what the rules might be around independent contractors, et cetera. If you go to the U.S. Chamber's guide on this, we have what's in the legislation, but we think there could be greater clarity. Businesses can borrow an amount that's equal to 2.5 times their monthly average payroll. There's some good news that's come out in the last couple of days on this about how you calculate that payroll. You can include the gross payroll amount that you pay your employees, which means it's inclusive of the employee portion of those payroll taxes, not inclusive of the employer portion, but inclusive of the employee portion. This will be important because it increases the amount you can borrow and increases the amount that you can have forgiven, which we'll talk about in a second. As you know, local and national lenders are participating in this. You may have heard some hiccups about banks hitting their limits on these loans. The issue isn't that banks have a limit on what they can do under the program. The issue is that we have generally applied to banks limits on how much they can lend out based on their own ratios of capital, et cetera. The Federal Reserve issued an announcement 2 days ago that said they were going to be providing a loan facility, which would essentially create a secondary market for those banks, which means that they can move those loans off their books and begin providing more loans to small businesses in your area. Again, no real minimal requirements, no collateral, no personal guarantee. Loans convert to grants, equal the amount spent on payroll, rent, interest. We said on mortgage that this has now been expanded by the SBA. Any interest you pay on debt incurred before February 15th qualifies for the forgiveness. However, of your total amount for forgiveness, no more than 25% can be for things that aren't payroll related. Importantly, to maximize your forgiveness, beginning 8 weeks. It's the 8-week period after origination in which we calculate what you spent on payroll and expenses to qualify for loan forgiveness. So if you get a loan, immediately after you get that loan, to maximize your loan forgiveness, you need to begin paying your employees or bringing those employees back. If you don't bring them back, if you reduce your employee headcount or you reduce employee wages by more than 25%, you lose some of that loan forgiveness. And again, for employers who've already let employees go or cut their wages, you can actually bring them back. And as long as you bring them back and maintain their employment through June 30th, you're held harmless for purposes of the loan forgiveness. We are updating our guide based on all of this new information. I think this is our third update based on the third round of guidance from the SBA, but it'll always live live at uschamber.com/SB loans. Quickly, economic injury disaster loans. This is the normal thing that you would get after a tornado, for example, except it's been expanded, applied nationwide, up to $2 million in working capital. Loans are based on credit scores rather than tax returns. Up to $200,000 without a personal guarantee, no collateral for up to $25,000. There's the possibility of applying and receiving up to $10,000 as an emergency grant within 3 days of applying for the loan that doesn't have to be repaid. Now, we've talked to lots of businesses across the country who've applied for this loan, requested the grant, and more than 3 days have passed. While the law says 3 days, the truth is that the SBA system, and all this is done through sba.gov, is completely overwhelmed. And they're having a difficult time processing all the applications for loans and all the applications for emergency grants. The good news is we have also talked to people whose money has come through. And so we know it's working. It's just slow, and they're having a volume problem. Just quickly, everyone, to remind everyone, paid sick leave requirements. This is from the Phase 2 bill. If you have fewer than 500 employees, you are required, as of 7 days ago, to provide paid sick leave to your employees when they are ill or quarantined due to an exposure or have to take care of a family member, including a child, because their daycare or school is closed. You have to pay them at the regular rate of pay. If they're sick or being quarantined, not to exceed $511 a day. If they're taking care of someone, 2/3 of their rate of pay, not to exceed $200. You will be reimbursed for this. The federal government reimburses you up to the maximum daily amount for what you pay your employees. A lot of folks have said, hey, I have less than 50 employees. I can be exempt from this, right? Well, if you go to the Department of Labor guidance, the truth is you could be exempt from it, but only with respect to the leave that's related to caring for a child, and only if the owner of the business certifies that providing the leave threatens the viability of the business for being a business. And by the way, if your employees can telework, it doesn't apply to them. Same thing for the extended leave. This only applies if you have an employee whose child's school or childcare is closed. They can get up to 10 weeks of paid leave. It's the same amount, 2/3 regular rate, $200 a day, same reimbursement, same limitations in terms of your ability to be exempted from this requirement if you have fewer than 50 employees. So there's a lot of this that is kind of changing as we go through it. We're keeping updated at uschamber.com. uschamber.com/co also has resources for small businesses. I know the Kentucky Chamber is producing a lot of incredible material that they're getting out to, and we're happy to help provide some of this and do provide this to them so that they can utilize it too, and we can all kind of share the workload here. But with that, let me turn it back over to Ashley, and we can start with your questions.
Thanks. And that was great information. I mean, I even learned, I feel like I've been living and breathing this for the last couple of weeks. And there were questions that I had that were answered. One that just kind of jumped off the page at me is we have gotten a lot of questions because of the enhanced unemployment insurance benefits of most people who are taking unemployment are actually here in Kentucky are actually making more than they were when they were working. And that's because of the extra $600 from the federal government. And, right now it's very much needed and we advocated for it. And that goes through the end of July. But one thing you mentioned, I just want to clarify is if your employer offers you your job back, you must take it or you would lose that unemployment insurance. Because one question we've had is if people are making more on unemployment insurance, when the economy does reopen, if they get offered their job back, but they realize they're still making more on unemployment insurance, they're worried about the workforce. So just to clarify, if an employer does offer an employee their job back and they turn it down, they will no longer be eligible for unemployment insurance.
That is correct as a matter of law. Now, as a matter of enforcement, obviously someone has to enforce that and police that. But as a matter of law, normally you have to be willing to accept work. And in this case, we've made an exemption from that normal. You have to be looking for work and willing to accept work. We've made an exemption from that requirement on the basis that your employer has furloughed you or laid you off and that you are temporarily displaced and can't do that job, not because you made a decision not to do this job. And so once you make that decision, it's the same thing as quitting.
Right. And one thing we've gotten a lot of questions about is with unemployment insurance benefits. Here in Kentucky, our trust fund is pretty solid. After the recession, we obviously got hit a little bit and employers had to pay an assessment. We paid that off early about five years ago at this point. And so employers have worried, oh my gosh, what is this going to do to our trust fund? But we have talked to officials here in Kentucky that have assured us that the extra $600, or if you were displaced because of COVID-19, that basically is part of the federal package. And so officials here in Kentucky are very hopeful that it will not have a drastic impact on our trust fund. I mean, we will see how long this lasts and kind of how we go from almost 30% unemployment back to normal. But I think that's something that I'd like to share because we've gotten a lot of questions about employers getting hit with an assessment. After this is done, when independent contractors and those who have never paid into the system are also drawing now from the system.
You're exactly right. And the goal is not to take a drastic hit. The uptake will cause some balance drawdown for state unemployment systems, but all of these add-on benefits that you just described, the $600, the independent contractors, the emergency COVID-19 unemployment, that's all coming out of the federal treasury.
Great. One question that we have, and I think it's a question we've been thinking a lot about, and I'm sure you guys have as well as the U.S. Chamber, is I kind of look at this in phases, and we're very much in phase one, the emergency situation where here at the Chamber, we are, collecting PPEs, we're making sure people can get the loans or that their people can file for unemployment insurance benefits, and we're kind of still in the war zone right now of making sure everyone has their immediate needs met. And you guys are doing the same way and providing all of this education that we're all using. But I think, in the next couple of weeks, we're all kind of going to shift our focus to how do we reopen the economy and how after this going from an all-time high in the economy and then all of a sudden going to the highest level of unemployment we've ever seen, the biggest drop in the loss of GDP we've ever seen. How do we reopen our economy in probably a phase-like approach? And have you all at the U.S. Chamber been in contact with other nations who are now starting to slowly reopen, and any lessons learned there? I think that's the big question many of us are grappling with is how do we eventually go back to normal?
Yeah, we've been following what other nations are doing. We also have a whole kind of task force that's working on this. And we actually expect to have kind of a first set of questions, some of which have answers, some of which don't have answers yet, that we think are going to confront business as we gradually reopen. And so we're working on 6 different buckets that we have to kind of resolve. The first bucket is you're going to have some essential services that are in place to be able to return. Think about childcare, for instance, right? And by the way, we're going to want childcare providers to do more social distancing, at least for a while, than they normally do. That means that we're going to have more childcare providers serving fewer people. We're going to have to find some way to get them back. Same way, particularly in urban areas with transit issues, et cetera. if we're going to test employees coming back, that's a whole lot of tests. And who's going to pay for those tests? Who's going to administer them? You may have read the story about the White House. Anyone who goes to see the president or the vice president stops by the White House physician's office and gets tested first. Well, that's great if you have a physician's office in your business and you can get first dibs on all the tests. What are the rest of us going to do? We have to figure that out. There's also a lot of questions around health privacy and Americans with Disabilities Act, right? If we're saying if you're immune compromised or you're in a particular group that could be affected and we're not bringing you back, there creates lots of issues there that employers have never had to grapple with. Also with general liability, if we're going to give everyone face masks, if your industrial members know that when they provide protective equipment, they have to train their employees on the proper use on it. We have no one I'll speak for the U.S. Chamber. We have no one at the U.S. Chamber who's going to train, who knows how to train us to do that. And so we have to figure that out. And then of course, we also know that some businesses, as they reopen, cannot be profitable with social distancing. So think about your restaurants, your bars, your movie theaters. That math does not work at 50% occupancy. So they're going to have a longer bridge. And the individuals who can't come back to work quickly are also going to have a longer bridge. So there are probably other issues we haven't identified, but those are the 6 areas that we're working through right now that we think are key to reopening.
That's fascinating. I read an article this morning about Austria slowly starting to reopen. I think it was Austria, and that they're requiring face masks now. So you can go out in public and go to stores or whatever it could be. Businesses can be open, but you have to wear a face mask. So it's gonna be an unusual time that we'll have to kind of make sure that we do, I think, in phase-like approaches, but hopefully we can get through this in the next couple of months and see, what do you all look at the kind of economic outlook of this? Or do you all even have kind of any notion of, people compare it to post 9/11 or post the recession, but it's completely different from that to where business is literally paralyzed. And so working with any kind of economists or other groups, have you guys had any kind of economic forecasting on how will we bounce back from this?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of this since maybe mid-February or March. It all blends together, but we're kind of in our 3rd estimate of what this looks like. At first, we were hoping that this would be a V-like event. So sharp decline, hit bottom, sharp increase as we bounce back. A couple of weeks ago, it became clear that we were not going to have a V-shaped event, and we were hoping for a U-shaped event. Sharp decline, a sustained period of less economic activity, a resumption. Based on what we just talked about this kind of phased return, it's going to be more like a check mark or the Nike swoosh. So sharp decline, and then level, and then coming back up gradually. So every time we've moved that, it moves full recovery out further. So when a month ago we were talking about back to trend line for Q3 of this year, and then we kind of moved it to Q4, we're probably in a Q1 next year of returning to trend line.
That makes sense. One question we've gotten a lot of, and I know here in Kentucky, we're a manufacturing state. And so some manufacturers like Toyota have closed. They're paying their people in full. Others have remained open and have retooled to make PPEs. Do you see any kind of mass manufacturing shutdown? Because that really is one of the industries that can't function remotely. So I don't know if you've heard anything on the federal level about kind of a blanket manufacturing halt, but that's a question we've gotten a lot of.
No, and we don't see, we continue to not expect any federal orders on shutdowns. The administration is pretty committed to leaving this to the states. I mean, we still have some states who don't have shelter-in-place orders, amazingly, but they are leaving it to the states. Manufacturing is generally pretty critical in the list of essential services, and so there's some protection there. I think more of the issue is as we return to work, particularly for manufacturing, how for those who have shut down, what's the environment that you're operating in for the safety of your employees with social distancing and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have many other webinars today with other state chambers, but to wrap up a lot, I know you guys have talked to the U.S. Chamber quite a bit about the next phase in this. And I know we've talked about kind of the recovery. One thing that goes to my mind is always, I think about the New Deal, not the Green New Deal, but the New Deal. And do we look at big infrastructure packages? Do we look at kind of this big government spending as a way to get people back to work? Here in Kentucky, we desperately need more money for infrastructure, as we do on the federal level as well. And we've worked closely with you all on advocacy for increased infrastructure investment. So in these next couple of phases, we asked Leader McConnell this as well, and he said right now, the ink has just dried on the other packages, and we're working through implementation and making sure there's enough money for the loans. But I know you all, like us, are at heart an advocacy organization. And so in the next couple of months, do you see opportunities for infrastructure investment or any kind of big ideas like that, though they do take some economic resources from state or federal level, can really lead to a boom in the economy?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're a couple phases from that. So, the first order, that 350 billion loan grant program, we talked about the Paycheck Protection, that's going to run out. Leader McConnell is trying to move legislation tomorrow through the Senate to replenish that fund. That's really important, and we're very pleased to see that he's taken such quick action to do that. The next kind of legislative bill, I think, is likely to address gaps that we've identified and support now. And also, as this is going on longer than anyone anticipated when the CARES Act, the Phase 3 bill, was implemented, that we're going to have to extend out some of these programs. The other thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to provide those resources for the gradual reopening, right? I think that's probably going to be the locus of a Phase 4. And then as we begin to gradually reopen, we're going to have to take a snapshot of what the economy looks like, what demand and investment looks like, and figure out what we need to do to boost demand and to boost investment. Infrastructure would make a perfect part of that latter part of it, because we've needed it for a long time, and it's a good long-term investment. But I think it's gonna be in that part of this discussion, that phase that we get to after we've kind of met the immediate needs of making sure that businesses don't go under, families don't go under, and then coming out of it.
Yeah, we're still very much in that battle zone type of mode right now of making sure all those needs are met. Neil, thank you so much. I know how busy you are in providing such great resources to all of us. We cannot thank you enough to the U.S. Chamber for all the help that you have given us in Kentucky, that we have then turned around and given to our businesses. The advice and the expertise is greatly appreciated. So we very much appreciate you. I hope to talk to you again soon. If you don't care, we are going to share this presentation. We are recording it right now. And
please do.
it will be on our website, kychamber.com, along with all of Neil's slides, which I was jotting notes down as we were going through. So
I should have mentioned, yes, we'll share them with you. You don't have to take notes.
Yeah. And so we're going to share those with everyone, because I do think it's a really good presentation that boils a lot of very complex information down to simple ways to define it, and that we can all use it as a resource. So we will send all of that out. But thank you again, Neil. Thank you to everyone joining us on this webinar. Keep checking back. We keep doing a couple of these a week. And so we will make sure to continue to provide this educational resource to all of our members and businesses here in Kentucky as we all navigate this new normal that we're living in. And we will get through this. And like the governor says, we will get through it together. So thank you all. Stay safe. Have a great week. And I hope everyone can go out and enjoy this beautiful weather. And thanks, Neil. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ashley.